medicine of East Asia is based on a science that does not hold itself separate from the phenomena that it seeks to understand. Our medicine did not grow out of petri dish experimentation or double-blind studies. It arose from observing nature and our part in it. East Asian medicine evolves not from the examination of dead structures, but rather from living systems with their complex, mutually entangled interactions. Welcome to Qiological. I'm Michael Max, the host of this podcast that goes in depth on issues pertinent to practitioners and students of East Asian medicine. Dialogue and discussion have always been elemental to Chinese and other East Asian medicines. Listen into these conversations with experienced practitioners that go deep into how this ancient medicine is alive and unfolding in the modern clinic. Hey everybody! Welcome to Qiological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear-Don't-Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. And where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting real Chinese medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com Your patients and the planet will thank you.
I have a really interesting guest today. Well, actually, I hope I usually have interesting guests for you guys, but this one in particular, Leo Lok, I think you're going to really enjoy. Leo is a licensed practitioner of Chinese medicine and has a private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's also the creator of a new series called Voices of Our Medical Ancestors, which you can find on Facebook, and I'm going to have links for you on the show notes page, so go check that out. This is the topic of our conversation today, and in addition to talking about Voices of Our Medical Ancestors, we're going to be getting into the classics of Chinese medicine. Leo is an avid contributor to the over 4,000 member group Scholars of Chinese Medicine, also on Facebook. And again, I'll have links for you, so don't worry about that. Leo has helped to research and answered more than 1,000 questions on the historical development, interpretations, and translations of Chinese medical topics for our colleagues all over the world. He's got more than just a finger on the pulse of the classics. So I'm totally excited to have Leo here to discuss this today. Leo, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's an honor to be on your show.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. Hey, I'm curious. I mean, you have an incredible background in the classics. Are you from a Chinese medical family, or do you just have an interest? I mean, how did you kind of land where you've landed? What's the path that you have followed here?
Well, I guess that has to go back like a long, long way. So I actually grew up in Malaysia, to a Chinese family.
Mm-hmm.
So my granduncle, my granduncle was a practitioner, and he taught my mom and all my aunts a lot about Chinese medicine. And we also have an uncle who's still practicing today, who is a specialist in post-stroke recovery using Tui Na, acupuncture, and Chinese herbs.
Wow. Maybe I should get him on the show.
maybe one day when he retires. So that's a little bit about the medical background.
Mm-hmm.
With the Chinese languages, even though we're outside of China, we grew up outside of China, but in that region, we retain a lot of the classical Chinese education, So we grew up reading the classics. You go to schools, meaning just classical literature in general.
Uh-huh. So you grew up with the classical literature,
Yeah.
part of which was the Chinese medicine classical literature.
No, the medical literature came later, but it was more of the common literature, like the four great classics of Chinese literature and things like that, Yeah.
Right. So you had a real foundation in the Su Wen, right? The ability to read and understand the old classical language.
Yeah, by the time I was 8, I already finished my first one from Ming Dynasty. Have you heard of the Journey to the West?
Oh, yes,
The
of
one,
course.
the monkey god, So
Yeah.
I finished that. I think by the time I was 9.
And not the comic book version.
No, the real Ming Dynasty
right
text. It was like close to 1 million words.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, that's kind of my nerdy background.
Yeah. Great. So you've recently started this series that we can find on Facebook, Voices of Our Medical Ancestors. Tell us more about this. What was the inspiration for this?
Sure. So over the years, I've interacted with a lot of non-Chinese speaking or literate practitioners all over the world, especially the last 3 years or so, being on Facebook. I've come across quite a few observations about this group of colleagues that I really care for. I think one of the most prominent feeling I get is that there's often a sense of alienation
Mm-hmm.
like from the tradition, because they don't speak Chinese, or a lot of them don't have a teacher that they keep in contact with after they graduated. So there's this often like, oh, I got into a practice, I'm on my own, they don't have many colleagues, and then they don't feel like they belong anywhere. Or there's a continuous stream of transmission or education they can get consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's your observation too, or
Well, I mean, I read a bit of Chinese, so I feel like I'm connected in that way.
Mhm.
But the Chinese that I read it's more modern Chinese,
uh,
right? The Gu Wen, the old stuff. I've never really learned that. And so to actually go to the original classics in the original language, I need to rely on like modernly written type commentaries,
I see.
right? Which helps. I mean, it gives me some access, but yeah, I mean, being able to really connect with those classics in the language that the classics were written in, that's kind of a rare thing. And certainly as a Western practitioner and Chinese is a second language for me, there's always this question of, am I really getting this in the way it was intended? Or am I just kind of reading things into it
Hmm.
because I think it's a good idea or I want to believe it's like this?
Yeah, and that's the second point I would like to bring up is there's often a lot of arguments and conflicts, and around medical doctrines and ideas from the classics, right?
Yes.
Uh, and we know people who get into it very fervently,
Mm.
or shall I say? And I, in my observation, there are actually two kinds of discussions or arguments. One is about the ongoing applicability of certain medical concepts or doctrines or principles. And I think that's necessary as practitioners in different countries, in different regions of the world, in different times. It's always necessary to have that kind of exchange and conversation. So that's one category. And another category sometimes has to do with a kind of lack of understanding or misinterpretation of the language itself or the culture,
Hmm.
or even something that I only come to it very recently is what scholars call material culture. Because a lot of times, books written in the past, people reference the world or the worlds they lived in, and they utilize metaphors and analogies from the daily things they interact with, like the chair or houses and going to work in the fields. A lot of times, the non-Chinese speaking world doesn't quite understand the things in those worlds. So when analogy and principles are being explained in terms of the workings of those material things, we tend to impose our modern understanding on those processes onto the ancient world.
Which could have a whole different meaning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's that kind of argument. I think if we know more about them, then we don't have to argue because it's just factual.
This is something I've heard other people talk about, and it certainly has run through my mind. It's this thing about, can we, with our modern minds and our modern concepts, understand where these ancient people were in their thinking and in their perceiving of the world?
I think we can't 100%, but we can get much closer
Mm-hmm.
if we understand the world they live in. Because I think so far, I don't want to call the West because we have a lot of people, a lot of colleagues now who don't live in the West, like our South American colleague, you know. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
non-speaking, non-Chinese speaking colleagues would be
Right, non-Chinese world.
non-Chinese world,
Waiguaran.
or even Chinese themselves,
Mm-hmm.
Then I think it's really important to draw in archaeology.
Tell us more about that.
Meaning, if you want to know, for example, like in the Neijing, chapter 1 of Ling Shu, they use the analogy of nu, which is, I think, what do you call those? I just lost it. The firing, which you fire like an arrow with it. What is that called?
Oh, a bow.
Yes, a bow, right? A bow, and then there's another device that they use to fire into the enemy. What is that called?
Crossbow?
Yeah, a crossbow, yes.
Okay.
Thank
More
you.
mechanized version.
The mechanized version of the bow is a crossbow. So
Okay.
they love using the analogy of a crossbow to describe how acupuncture works, right?
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
do we know how a crossbow works in Western Han? So that's why we see now in modern translations of these texts mistranslation, not because they're weak in the language, is because they don't really see the crossbow, the Western Han crossbow in their mind when they do the translation.
Uh-huh.
So, but that can be easily rectified now because we have images of these crossbows all in display in museums and they're on the web. We can call them up on Google Images and look at them and research them. And there are many documentaries that came out of China that talk specifically about weapons of the time. So if we do some research, then we immediately see what they're talking about. What is this part? What is that part? How does it work?
We have a better understanding then.
Oh, much better. I think in the 21st century right now, there's no better times to understand these things because they're all made available.
Right. So what you're looking to do then with your Voices of Medical Ancestors is bring in these deeper understandings.
Yeah, the images. It really,
and
what
the
we
images
lack right now is images and videos of how these things work. Because in the past, we had to focus quite a bit on philosophy, right? Because the non-material things. But now that we have the material things available to us, I think we should utilize them to their fullest extent.
Yeah. So, you just mentioned philosophy, which I think many of us that do Chinese medicine and many of us that were drawn to it, a piece of it, in addition to it being clinically really effective and helpful, is the philosophical aspect, and which I think is great. And yet, the real reason for us doing our work is to help people in the clinic. So I'd like to see if we could delve a little bit into how the classics and how the work that you're doing helps practitioners in the clinic, being able to take that philosophy and enter it in such a way or use it in such a way that it helps to boost up or give us greater insight into how we can help people in our clinical practices.
Absolutely. So should I share some of my cases?
Yeah, let's hear what you've got to say. I'd love to hear that.
So I think the difference between sort of a Chinese, well, I can say some Chinese practitioner versus non-Chinese speaking practitioner is that our clinical reasoning is not based on another language other than the classics. So let me give you an example. So I had a patient recently, not recently, in recent years. Nowadays there's a lot of paleo people, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I have a patient that I've seen in a while. Usually, he's in his 20s, very athletic, recovers really well. Usually he comes in 1 or 2 treatments, is good. Then one time he came in and we treated him for 2 times and he didn't recover. Just a really kind of a tweaked his left knee kind of thing,
Shouldn't be difficult.
It makes no sense because based on previous experience with this patient, He should have recovered by now, but he isn't. He didn't. So I asked, like, what happened? What did you change? He said, oh, I went on paleo recently. I was like, you got enough muscles. You don't need paleo, right?
Mm.
Um, so I said, well, would you consider uh, eating like bananas as medicine?
Uh-huh.
And I put it on 2 weeks worth of banana diet, and is completely good. After that.
Okay, so this is an especially interesting case given the popularity of paleo and how people really are cottoning these days to how diet can be helpful. Can you tell us where you dug this up in the classics? Yeah.
Yes. So what happened was, immediately when I heard that case, I said, this is from the Su Wen, because the Su Wen says, 甘苦极，及时甘以缓之. So that's what happens to us when we study in Chinese. That's what pops up in the mind immediately. It's like when I saw that, it's like 甘苦极，及时甘以缓之, banana. Right?
Right. Okay, so for our listeners that don't speak Chinese, how would you translate that?
So it says, the liver is suffering from tension. So when there's tension, quickly or immediately eat something sweet to relax it.
Sweetness to relax the liver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the classics being alive. It's like you have a clinical encounter, and immediately the line comes up, and then you prescribe something, and then the problem solved.
Right. And that goes so counter, especially to people with paleo, because they're often thinking in terms of blood sugar. They're often thinking in terms of, I need to eat this to get that.
Yeah.
And this is just a whole, well, first of all, that's a whole different way of looking at it. Secondly, and this is, and I do want to hear some more case studies, but I want to dig into this piece first. So because you studied this stuff, it's like somewhere in your brain, somewhere in your mind, your sensorium, whatever, you've got these lines of the classics floating around.
That's right.
And then something happens in the clinical encounter, and this idea or this thought comes through, and you go, oh yeah, gankuji. And you go, oh yeah, right. This is a liver and tension problem.
Yes.
For those of us that are not native Chinese speakers, or even those that are native Chinese speakers but haven't schooled themselves in the classics this way, how can we go about developing this sort of a mind that allows us to have information that, I don't want to say is indexed like a computer, but is somehow in there and accessible, so that in the midst of a clinical encounter, it can arise?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good question, and probably that's why I do what I do. So to give context and to give a really, how would you say, compelling enough of a story and scenario around that line, so that you remember.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not very different from how a child learns languages.
Or an adult, for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the language is not learned through grammar, for a natural acquisition like in a child. It's learned through scenarios in lives, the vignettes in life where mom or dad, had a like sort of like a interesting emotional response to a scenario, and there's certain utterances that came out of that scene, and we remember them because it's emotionally impactful or visually interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yes, that is exactly it. I remember when I was studying Chinese in Taiwan, I had a number of people tell me the best way to learn a word is to associate a story or an emotion with it.
Yeah.
And then later I came to realize that when I was in the midst of something that really caught me emotionally, and maybe I misspoke something and was corrected, I would never again have a problem with that word.
Yeah.
So yeah, whether you're an adult or a child, that natural acquisition by connecting it with other things, including emotion and story and imagery, seems to be really powerful.
Which are meaningful and, close to our hearts.
Yes.
I think that's the easiest way to acquire something. So
make it meaningful and close to your heart.
Yeah. So, and I think there has to be a recognition that path towards acquiring this kind of facility will differ from person to person, and also from native speakers, from somebody who's not native speakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the common ground is the same, like we just talked about. It has to be meaningful, it has to be emotionally impactful, and it has to be interesting.
Yes, and visual doesn't hurt either.
Yes, in our 21st century, visual is the way to go. Right?
Right.
So, can I share another case?
Oh, yes. Yeah, this is great.
So that was chapter 22. So we're going to talk about Su Wen chapter 23. So this is another interesting, very modern scenario that we deal with every day in like an American clinic, right? So there's another guy in his 20s, very healthy, came to me and he says, I have a problem. I lifted like a glass bottle full of water. It's like those 1.5 liters, whatever bottle, and I sprained my my middle finger. And it has been a couple of months, and I don't seem to be able to recover from it. What's going on? You look very healthy. You're in the prime of your life.
Yeah.
How can you not recover from something so small?
Right.
So and then he says, oh, and I eat very healthily. It's like I'm on a very healthy diet. I said, something.
I know, isn't it great when people say that? You get to ask the question, great, so tell me what a healthy diet looks like.
Exactly. Right? And it says, oh, I'm onto this kombucha thing. I brew my own kombucha, and then it tastes great, and it gives me so many antioxidants, blah, 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 blah. I said, bingo. Stop the kombucha immediately and throw it out, and make sure that it leaves your house.
And make sure it leaves your house.
Yeah, because when you make kombucha in the room, and if you live in an apartment, the whole apartment is infused with kombucha.
Mm-hmm. So those little spores, it's almost like a mold infestation.
Yeah. So, but where does the reasoning come from? Because the Su Wen 23 says, 酸走筋，筋病无多时酸. If you have tendon problems, don't eat sour things. Right? So we have that a lot in martial arts applications, right? A lot of martial art people, if you're injured, you injure your tendons, avoid sour things.
Okay, so all right, this really brings something up for me. Because I have heard people talk about it this way. But I've also heard, I remember in my early Chinese medicine education, that the liver likes sour, and when there's tendon issues, a lot of people think you want to go and use sour. How do you explain these differences?
Then is 太过 and 不及, too much and too little.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If we don't have enough, you really want to astringent the tendons, then you eat some sour, of course. But too much of it,
And the tendons get too tight.
they're too tight.
Right.
Or sometimes, I don't know, they just get easily injured, and you can't. Basically, the person could not recover. So within a month of getting rid of that thing, he recovered.
Mm-hmm. Would this also be a case where a little bit of sweet might be helpful for that?
I think so, and something spicy too, like warming spicy will help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, is a line straight out of the classics. Like we encounter all these modern, like we have never seen before, kind of diets or dietary supplements or health foods, superfoods. But I always go back to the classics. I don't care what you call it. Does it taste sour or does it taste sweet? That's all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so far, it pans out okay. Right? It works.
Have you got any other case studies for us?
I do. A lot. I don't know how like complicated kind of a case, because those two are pretty simple.
Those two are pretty simple. Okay, so give us a moderately difficult case. Let's see how this plays out.
So maybe we can do a moderate, and then we can do a little complicated one.
All right, let's do it.
A moderate one will be, okay, so this is quite a number of years ago. There was a middle-aged guy. He's a chef. He came to me and he says, I went to I don't know how many doctors. Can't breathe. So he has this severe shortness of breath. He says, the only place I can breathe into are my temples.
Only place he can breathe into is his temple?
Yeah, so like a sensation.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't feel like anything is expanding or allowing the breath to come through, like from his throat down.
Okay.
That's pretty scary, right? And he went to his doctors, and his doctor says, you have no problem. There's nothing wrong with you. But he says, I feel like I'm gonna die because I can't breathe.
We get this.
Right?
We get this a lot. People have something. It's very real for them. They go and get tested, and they're not told we can't find out why. They're told you don't have this problem.
Yeah, yeah. And he says,
but of course they do.
And says, I'm afraid I'm gonna die from suffocation.
Yeah.
Right? I says, oh, that's really interesting. And I mean, he's a very robust kind of guy. He's not weak. He doesn't have any lung or COPD or anything like that. He's just a really robust, hardworking man.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, huh. And then a line from the 金匮要略 came, right? It says, 平人无寒热，短气不足以习者，时也. It's a normal person, not having any fever or feeling chilled, right? And yet having shortness of breath, so much so they cannot complete a full breath. This is repletion. This is excess.
Wow. And there it is. I mean, that just describes it to a T.
Right? And then I said, and then I took his pulse. And his pulse, the twin position is a little sunken, a little weak and tight. And then the guan position is a little tight. And then it says, and that's like 寸口脉沉而迟，冠上小紧束. That's 瓜蒌蟹白白酒汤. In the 胸壁 chest beat chapter, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this is a classic. It fits the lines perfectly. So there's nothing more to do than prescribe as the line says. And then he says, well, I can't drink alcohol. I said, no problem. We'll just use the gualo and the 蟹白. 2 herbs. So he took it. Then within 24 hours, he started having diarrhea, but not normal diarrhea, but globs of white gooey phlegm came out of his bowel movement.
Wow.
Right, and then within a day, he was 50% better, and we keep doing it, and it keeps purging, and then within 2 weeks, he was completely normal.
Phlegm obstruction.
Yeah. But what came out was phlegm. It was like undeniable. He saw it himself, and it's like all what came out is white stuff.
That's amazing.
So then, why not the classics? Because just as it has worked 1,800 years ago, even older, like 2,000 years to 2,500 years ago, it will still work today.
Yeah. As long as you are sort of lining up all the pieces that are relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I'm not saying it will always work 100%, but sometimes it works like magic.
It works like magic. Well, and again, it's coming from this ability to have this image and sense of the line and what it looks like and what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So you can recognize it when someone with that is sitting in front of you.
That's right. And that's why I think it's so important to learn in 3D.
Mm.
It's not just the line, they're not just words, but there are words painting a picture of a live person.
Right. So a little later, we're going to get more into sort of where you see Voices of Medical Ancestors going. But for the moment, in hearing you talk about what you've just said, I'm wondering if you have other suggestions for our listeners on how they can read the classics with an eye toward getting more than words out of them.
Yes, I think even just with the translations that we already have, maybe trying to visualize it. Right? If like take the Shanghanlun for example, you translated Professor Huang's book, right? Didn't you?
Yeah, yes, I did. And one of the things I love about that book is he's got a few drawings in there. I don't know, there's maybe 20-ish drawings. They're sort of cartoonish, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of hilarious, but they're these wonderful caricatures of what someone looks like. So he's got this great picture of this Guizhi Xiaojia, right? This cinnamon twig girl, yeah, and she's this thin, wispy thing, and there's a fan like blowing her away, and then there's this, I think it's the Da Huang Xinseng, right? It's this big, strong dude.
That's right.
Big burly guy. And I've seen too, some of the time that I've spent in bookstores in Asia, sometimes it will be like the cartoon version of the Huangdi Neijing or the cartoon version of the Shanghanlun. And they'll often have these caricature cartoons that represent what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I would encourage everybody, who's interested to explore more of the visual side of things, because it's really actually I think the lines sometimes are actually they're dehydrated vegetables.
Mm.
We kind of have to put the water back in them so that they rehydrate and get restored back to a live sort of a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional clinical encounter with a real person. Does that make sense?
That's a great image. That I'm just kind of soaking in the sense that these lines they're dehydrated, and we can make them not just 3D but 4D, because we can actually begin to perceive over time what would happen, just like in the clinic.
Yeah, else they will come across as very dry. Like I think I remember in your previous podcast with Zev, you talked about a little bit about how sometimes it can come across as very dry, these classics.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because we haven't been able or alerted to the fact that we can actually put some juice back into them.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Lok, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
That is such. I'm just thinking about my own experience with reading this stuff, and at times I just want to give up because it's like
Yeah.
it's terse, it's dry, in some ways it's very thin, and yet if I can let that inspire something in me to put more into it, how does this fit with my clinical experience? What might this look like? What do I bring to the encounter with this line? It might help to open it up.
Yeah, and then I would highly recommend that we don't just study the lines by themselves because that's very dry, but instead study clinical cases, case histories by famous doctors or doctors from Ming Dynasty or whatever on that particular line, so that you always have a story to go with it.
Yeah. I don't know anyone who doesn't like a good story.
Yeah. So, and I would say, maybe from this conversation, we can inspire all our colleagues worldwide to start to think along those lines and start to fill up these images and volumize them. Yeah, I think it's the approach. It's the approach. I don't think in any way that our non-speaking colleagues are any less intelligent or capable than the Chinese colleagues. It's just that up to this point, we haven't figured out these strategies and how to make these things alive and interesting so we can absorb them easily.
Well, you've given us some great inspiration and direction today on how to begin that journey. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Give us a glimpse, if you can, of where you see voices of our medical ancestors headed in the future. And from our conversation today, it's really clear to me that part of what you're doing with this is to help, I guess you could say, volumize the lines and take the dryness and add some water to it and begin to see how those stories unfold. What do you have in store for us in the future?
I'm thinking of an analogy of a time machine, like a metaphor of a time machine. So because we now have enough resources to reanimate the past with visuals, with unearthed or excavated text and archaeology. So it is time to put the ancient world back together.
Yeah.
And then put the medical classics or the lines back into where it began.
Well, and I hear you adding a third component, which is modern clinical practice.
Yes, yes, right. So there is these connections between the lines with the ancient physical world, the lives of the ancients across time and across space into our own practice and into our friends and family. Like reconnecting all those threads.
I'm just sitting here in quiet for a moment. I get to edit this stuff a little bit too, so I can be quiet for a moment. And I'm just so appreciative of your perspective across time and ability to use the modern technology to enliven this material that for many of us is so dry and dusty we've got no idea where to begin, and to enliven it in such a way that it actually helps inform our clinical practice.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times is, again, I want to go back to the fact that our Chinese speaking colleagues are just as capable. It is just that nobody has, well, I wouldn't say nobody, but up to this point, we haven't been able to provide that kind of ecosystem or environment where all these different components, the history, the material culture, the things, the world they live in, the spatial sense, all come together to give everybody an equal chance of understanding what was being presented.
Yeah, well, much appreciation for your efforts with this and for sharing this with us. Leo, is there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with as we come to the end here?
Just maybe one more thing, and there's a reason why I named my Facebook page or channel Voices of Our Medical Ancestors, not Voices of My Medical Ancestors. You see, it is ours because the moment somebody committed to the path of a Chinese medical practice, it really doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, what language they speak. This is our collective history and a collective heritage, I would say.
Yeah.
Right? And that's important because I think a lot of times people just feel not disconnected from the lineage. And somehow you have to go to China or have a master teacher to be inducted into the hall of the lineage. I don't think that's necessary. If we have a better way, a more public way or democratic way of connecting people to these lines of transmissions without having to jump through hoops and do some kind of initiation in a secret lineage or something. It can be an open source knowledge.
Well, again, links to this will be on the show notes page, folks. So hop on over there to qiological.com and check it out and see what Leo's been up to and what he's going to be sharing with us in the future. Leo, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful talking with you. And I look forward to the voices of our medical ancestors as it continues to unfold.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, my friend, that is a wrap. And that was one kick-ass awesome interview. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.